So I was once taught you should always open an important speech by making reference to a shared experience. So, what do we all have in common here at Rescue the Republic? Nothing. In a pre-Trump universe, chimpanzees would be typing their fourth copy of Hamlet before RFK Jr., Robert Malone, Zuby, Tulsi Gabbard, Russell, Brett Weinstein, and I would organically get together for any reason, much less an event like this. One thing we all have in common, or most of us have in common, is that most everybody here has been censored. Now, the issues were all different, but pretty much everybody here disagreed with authoritative voices about something. Now, saying no is very American, from don't tread on me to nuts to you cannot be serious. Defiance is in our DNA. Now, disagreement is seen as a threat and must be hammered out of existence, according to John Kerry, the former presidential candidate. Just the other day, did you hear about this? He complained at a World Economic Forum meeting that it's, quote, really hard to govern, and our First Amendment stands as a major block to the important work of hammering out unhealthy choices. I was telling Tim Pool about this backstage, and he asked, was black ooze pouring out of his mouth when he said this? Kerry added that it's really hard to build consensus, and he told forum members that they need to win the right to govern and be free to implement change. It begs the question, what do they need to be free of? The First Amendment, definitely, but more importantly, us. Complainers. That is our shared experience. We are obstacles to consensus. My name is Matt Taibbi. I've been a reporter for 35 years, covering everything from Pentagon accounting to securities fraud to drone warfare. Many years ago, my little son asked me what I did for a living, and I said, Daddy writes about things that are so horrible they're interesting. 2 years ago, I was invited by Elon Musk to look at internal correspondence in Twitter. And this led to a series of stories called the Twitter Files, whose main revelation was a broad government effort to suppress speech. Now, I was invited here to talk about risks to the First Amendment, but to spare the suspense, that battle is already lost. State censorship is a fact in most of the West. In February, our European allies began observing the Digital Services Act, which requires internet platforms to enforce judgment of state-appointed content reviewers with the Orwellian name trusted flaggers. Now, everything that we found in the Twitter files can be reduced to one sentence: an alphabet soup of U.S. government federal agencies informally is already doing pretty much the same thing as Europe's horrible draconian new law. Is it against the law when a White House official calls Facebook, and this happened, and asked to ban a journalist for writing that the COVID vaccine doesn't stop infection or transmission? I think, hell yes. It certainly violates the spirit of the First Amendment, even if you can find judges who will say it doesn't violate the letter. But this is post-9/11 America. Whether it's about surveillance or torture or habeas corpus or secret prisons or rendition or any of a dozen other things, we ignore laws. Institutional impunity is the chief characteristic of our current form of government. We have concepts like illegal but necessary. The government can torture. Of course, the public can't. That's probably good. The state can intercept phone calls. You can't. The state can search without warrants. They can assassinate, snatch your geolocations from your cell phone. You get the idea. These concepts require that officials have special permission to ignore laws when they feel like it. 10 years ago, we were caught spying on 3 different French presidents, as well as companies like BNP Paribas, Crédit Agricole, Peugeot, Renault, and Total. Barack Obama called the French to apologize, but did we stop? But we did indict the person who released the news, Julian Assange. By the way, congratulations to Julian for getting out. Finally. And shame on every journalist who didn't call for his release. America ignores laws. It's what we do. With this in mind, our government has moved past censorship to the larger project of changing the American personality. They want a more obedient, more timorous, more fearful citizen. And their tool is the internet, which is a vast machine for doling out rewards and punishments through likes and views or shaming and de-amplification. The mechanics are complicated, but the core concept is pretty simple. You're up-ranked for accepting authority. You're down-ranked for questioning it. Questions are actually considered a form of disinformation in some ways. So let me pause to say something about America's current intellectual class from which the anti-disinformation complex works. By the way, there are no working-class censors. The dirty secret of content moderation all over the world is that it's a tiny sliver of educated rich correcting everybody else. It's telling people what fork to use, but you can get a degree in it, basically. The problem is America has the most useless aristocrats in history. Even the French dandies who were marched to the razor by the Jacobins were towering specimens of humanity compared to the Michael Haydens, John Brennans, James Clappers, Mike McFalls, and Rick Stengels, who make up America's self-appointed speech police. In pre-revolutionary France, even the most drunken, depraved, debauched libertine had to be prepared to back up an insolent act with a sword fight to the death. Our aristocrats pee themselves at a mean tweet. These people have no honor, no belief, no poetry, no art, no humor, no patriotism, which is unique to them, no loyalty, no dreams, and no accomplishments. They are simultaneously illiterate and pretentious, which is very hard to pull off. And they have one idea, and it's not even an idea but a sensation: fear. Rightly so, because they snitch each other out at the drop of a hat. They're afraid of each other. But they're also terrified of everyone outside their social set, and they live in near constant dread of being caught with even one original opinion. Now, freedom of speech is a beautiful phrase. It's strong, it's optimistic, it has a ring to it, right? But it's being replaced in the discourse by misinformation and disinformation. And these words aren't beautiful at all, but they're full of the small, pettifogging, bureaucratic anxiety of a familiar American villain, the busybody, the prohibitionist, the nosy Parker, the snoop. H.L. Mencken defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that somebody somewhere is happy. That streak of our early European settlers survives in us and surfaces periodically through moral panics. 400 years ago, it was witches, then it was Catholic immigrants, then it was the devil's music, then it was comic books, then it was booze, then it was communists, and now it's information. And because freedom of speech is now frequently described as a stalking horse for hate and discrimination, the phrase appears less and less. Speech is mentioned in reputable media really only as a possible vector for the disease of misinformation or disinformation. And for most people, the only thing that will remain of this issue soon is a little flutter of nerves reminding them not to think about it. That's why it's important to understand the end game of the censors is not controlling speech. They're already doing that. They're already removing speech. The end game is getting us to forget that we ever had anything to say. Yeah, that was the bummer part of the speech. To small thinkers, speech is just a wilderness of threats. You know, the people who look outside the window and they see nothing but ticks and bugs and germs and bats. The people who built this country, whatever else you can say about them, they weren't small thinkers. They were big thinkers. And by that I mean not just intellect, but arrogance, gall, brass, audacity. Kurt Vonnegut, that's all right. Kurt Vonnegut called the Founding Fathers sea pirates, and he wasn't far off. These guys stole a continent from the King of England and got away with it. And you ever think about why people root for the robbers in heist movies? There's a little bit of outlaw in all of us. Eminem said there ain't no such thing as halfway crooks, and there was nothing halfway about the writers of the Constitution. James Madison, the author of the First Amendment, foresaw this exact situation of a government that ignores laws. In fact, and I didn't know this until I had to research the speech, he was originally opposed to the Bill of Rights because he didn't think paper guarantees could stop a corrupt government. So he thought bigger. He put together a document that was designed to inspire a certain personality type that would resist efforts to undo the experiment. And here a very important quality came into play. James Madison was a great writer. The 44 words of the First Amendment were composed with extraordinary subtlety. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, and here's the alliterative part, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Yes, let's applaud for that. Now, what was he saying? The First Amendment didn't confer rights to the people. It didn't entrust government with guaranteeing them. Instead, the founders stood to the side the way an old country recognizes a new country, and they simply acknowledged an eternal truth, the freedom of the human mind. And this is what censors never understand. Speech is free. Trying to stop it is like trying to catch butterflies with a hammer or stop a flood with a teaspoon. Choose your metaphor, but it's a fool's errand. You can apply as many rules as you want. You can threaten punishment. You can lock people up. The human mind always sets its own course, even in spite of itself. Well, the poet William Ernest Henley explained about a century after the Constitution was written. He said, remember, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And unlike the busybodies of the internet age, to whom words are just another overproduced, overplentiful, unnecessary, and vaguely hazardous commodity, like greenhouse gases or plastic soda bottles, people like Madison understood the value of language. In 1787, you might have to walk a mile or 5 just to see a printed word. And it was probably the Bible. Now, I'm not religious, but I've read the Bible, and of course, so did they. They knew the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And this was a reference to Genesis. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light," and the world was born. So for them, the Word was infused with the power of creation itself. It wasn't a small thing. This wasn't just law. This was metaphysics. This was cosmogony. We were a little country run by a bunch of jumped-up tobacconists and corn farmers who needed an ally to withstand the wrath of European royalty. And we got it by lighting a match under human ingenuity and creativity and passion. Now, what was the American personality? Madison said he hoped to strengthen the will of the community, but other revolutionaries weren't quite so polite. Thomas Paine's central message was that compared to even the humblest farmer was a towering moral giant compared to the invertebrate scum who wore crowns and lived in British castles. Common sense told us to stand up straight, never bow, especially not to a politician, because, as Paine explained, and I want you all to think of John Kerry and Michael Hayden and Dick Cheney here, men who look upon themselves as born to reign and others to obey are frequently the most ignorant and unfit of any throughout the dominions. Oscar Wilde noted ours is the only country in the world where being a kook is respectable. Every other country shunned the tinkerer or the mad inventor or the crazy genius, and they cheerfully donated them to us, which turbocharged our American experiment. We welcome crazy people. And the world has light bulbs, the telephone, movies, airplanes, submarines, the internet, false teeth, the Colt 45, rock and roll, and monster dunks as a result. Wilde lampooned our ignorance and our lack of artistic sophistication and our occasional intolerance for ugly words. Hilariously, he refused to speak at a town that named himself Griggsville. He didn't want to encourage them. But his final observation about us was a supreme compliment. He said, "The Americans are the best politically educated people in the world. It is well worth one's while to go to a country which can teach us the beauty of the word freedom and the value of the thing, liberty." In my 20s, thank you. As a young man, I traveled to the former Soviet Union, spent a decade away from America, and I noticed that people from other cultures often had hang-ups about authority. The men from autocratic countries in the Middle East, they were always seemed to be coming up to me sideways and whispering as though they were afraid someone would hear, even if it was something meaningless. They would say, "Listen, my friend, the only good song George Michael ever wrote was Faith." And I'd say, "Why are we whispering?" And they'd say, "I don't know." People who grew up in places with the Queen and their money were class conscious and calibrated what they could say according to who else was at the table. Russians, they were like us. They're expressive and free-spirited and funny, but they're infected with a terrible fatalism, and they freeze around badges and insignias and other symbols of authority as if they have magic power. And over time, I realized I liked being an American. For the first time, It's really something to see the American experience through the eyes of foreigners. I did an interview once at a restaurant in Moscow called Scandinavia, and a group of European diplomats was having a conference, and they were complaining about a table of loud Americans, the typical ugly Americans, and they sent a young Swedish waiter over to deal with them. And this poor young man, he leaned over to the biggest and loudest of these finance bros who reminded me of guys who dumped my books in high school, so I wasn't sympathetic. But he leaned over and he said, "If you could keep your voice down, sir." And the American turned and said, "Is that a question?" He said, "You mean be quiet, right?" And the kid said, "Yeah." And so he stood up and he said, "Look, you're over here because a bunch of Belgians over there are too afraid to come over here themselves. You're carrying that like the weight of the world. I can see it. Let it go, man. And now even the diplomats grew spines. They said, hey, we're not Belgians. The Americans said, you're Belgians. And he gave the floor to the kid who said, please be quiet. And they gave him a $100 tip, and the kid walked around the rest of the night like he owned the place, and he probably went on to, I don't know. But I realized at that moment there's a little bit of asshole in every American, and that's a good thing. William Blake said, always be willing to speak your mind, and a base man will avoid you. And people from other countries have trouble with that concept, but Americans, we're born with it. And by the way, propaganda is the same trick. It's always the same thing as what happened in that restaurant. It's always someone else trying to make you feel bad for their mistakes, for their weakness. Don't go for it. Don't be ground down by it. Our tradition says stand up and give it back, which is why I say that Kerry, Hayden, Cheney, Adam Schiff, Craig Newmark, Reid Hoffman, Pierre Omidyar, and especially that Time editor turned self-appointed censor, Rick Stengel, should be packed into a rocket and launched into the fucking sun. And let's be clear about our language. Madison famously eschewed the word toleration or tolerance when it came to religion, and he insisted on the word freedom or liberty instead, or free exercise. And this became the basis for the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which became the basis for the Bill of Rights. And that's why we don't have toleration of religion. We have freedom of religion. And why we don't have toleration of speech, we have freedom of speech. That's using the right word at the right time. So to the people who are suggesting that there are voices who should be ignored, or people who are suggesting that I'm saying that I'm encouraging mistrust or skepticism or of authority, or that I'm obstructing consensus, I'm not encouraging you to be skeptical of authority. I'm encouraging you to defy authority. That is the right word for this time. And to all those snoops and nosy Parkers sitting in their Homeland Security funded centers of excellence, telling us day after day we must think as they say and vote as they say, or else we're traitorous, Putin-loving fascists and enablers of dangerous disinformation. Motherfucker, I'm an American. That shit doesn't work on us. And how can you impugn our patriotism when you're sitting in Klaus Schwab's lap, apologizing for the First Amendment to a crowd of Europeans? Look in the mirror. We're not the problem. You're the problem. You suck. Thank you.